Hello everyone and welcome back to Just Finish Coding. This is part 2 of our 3D Elf Run series which we're making on Scratch 3. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
Just finished coding.
Now I have to interject here that if you've not watched part 1 of this series, please watch it before you come here because as you can see, I'm picking up from where I left off, and for this video to make sense, you need to watch the previous one. I will leave a card for you right here. Please watch the video and then come right back. If you're still here, I'm going to assume that you've watched part 1, in which case let's continue with our player and then with our background. So in the last video I had the player movement set up, but as you can see the movement looks pretty weird, and I pointed this out in the last video but I left it out thinking that this was the best I could do. But as it turned out, I'd made a small mistake within my code, and that was simply the fact that my go to X was lane animation times 30 instead of lane animation times 60, which is the best way to move this guy around. And if you change that to 60 and then you press the green flag, you can see that the player moves way smoother and it's very well distinguished between the lines. So for example, now you can easily tell which lane the player is on compared to last time when there was still a bit of ambiguity. So now we can head over to the background, and here it's important to set up a couple of local variables or private variables before we proceed. So the first and most important is called spawn countdown, and I'll explain what this does in a second. As of now, just have that set up. The next one you have to set up is called X, and this represents the X value of the clone on the screen, but the X can be beyond the screen. For example, X could be way more than negative or positive 240. So you can click OK, and next we need a Y as well. After this, you need to set up one last private variable for the sprite only, and this one is called clone. And after this, I'm going to leave a question mark because this is going to be a Boolean variable with just two possible values, which is yes or no. And all this variable tells us is whether the particular object of the sprite is a clone or not. So now you can hide all of that, and it's not really necessary to show these things. And as usual, we'll start when we receive an init. So when I receive init, what I'll do is I will set spawn countdown. So set spawn countdown to 1. I will also set clone to no because this sprite is not a clone yet. Only when we have a when I start as a clone will we set clone to yes. Alright, so we have these two things in place. Next, I'm going to head over to looks, and I'm going to grab this block which says switch costume to, and make sure it says switch costume to house green. And if you look at your costumes here, you can see that we have 5 different costumes, and it's very important to make sure you have them arranged in this particular order. So if you have, for example, the road after tree, you're going to start getting some pretty massive errors, which would not happen if you have the costume set up this way. And this alone is not going to be enough because every single clone in the sprite, which isn't created right now, but it will be created later on, and all of those clones are going to receive this message. And if all of those clones do this, it's going to end up in quite a disaster. So what we need to do is, before we get into all of this code, we need to make sure that not only does this sprite and all the other clones hide, you can actually do it after you do this following code, which I'll tell you to do. And that is to delete all of the clones. So we just want this one sprite which is going to control all the clones and create new ones receiving this particular message. And the problem is, when we just grab or delete this clone from the control section, we can't really insert code after that, and that is quite a bit of a problem. And the simple way we can fix that is we can either just have an empty if else, like we can just say if 1 equals 1 or 0 equals 0, for example. Or simpler is just have a repeat one time, and that particular time we will just delete this clone, and then we can drag and drop all of this code after this. So I'm going to do it this way. I think it just makes things easier. And after this, we can head over to control once again and grab a when I start as a clone. So we're just going to do two simple things. First of all, we will make sure we go right at the back. So we will go to the front layer, not actually go to front layer, but we will just go backwards 9999 layers, or just 999 layers. Basically go to the most back possible layer which you can go to. And we also need to make sure that we edit this clone variable. So I will set clone to yes, because since the particular object is a clone, it's going to perform a different series of updates as opposed to the normal sprite. Alright, so before I get into the game tick, what I will do is add in a set size to 100%, just so that all the sizes are fixed correctly. So now we can grab another when I receive from the events category, and this time we can get into the tick message. So as it is when we start out, I'm going to enter into a simple if else. So I'm going to check if, and now we can grab an equal to from operators, and all I'm going to see is if the clone variable is set to yes or no. So first I'll do it I'll do it as yes first, and in this case I'll just create a new block, and I'm going to call this block clone updates, and I'm keeping it segregated just so that we can handle it better. So you don't have to click on run without screen refresh, and that would actually end up in a disaster and a fiasco if you do that. But you can just have it as a normal block, and you can drag and drop this block if clone is yes, and if the clone is not yes, only then do we perform this series of updates. So first we can deduct spawn countdown by 1, and all you have to say is change spawn countdown by -1. And I know that I haven't explained what spawn countdown does yet, and this is what it basically does. So you have to create your clones when the spawn countdown hits some particular number, and the spawn countdown is going to change whenever a game tick happens, and that is the way I'm doing it here. Now if I were to put it just like this, when I received a tick, the problem would be that every single clone does this, and as a result spawn countdown changes by many times, and each time it's different. So for example, if I had 5 clones on my screen, I would change spawn countdown 5 different times, plus 1 more time for the normal sprite which I have. So I would change it 6 more times. But if we have a simple clone variable and we do it this way, spawn countdown would change just once. And when we hit 0, which is what I'm doing right now, so I'll grab an if spawn countdown is equal to 0, just like this. And if this is the case, this is when I'll start to create my clones. And we need to switch our costumes in a pretty innovative way here. So the problem is all of our costumes work pretty good, except for the fact that the road needs to be set up in a different X and Y coordinate compared to the remaining costumes. And also the snowman needs to come only before the road. If the snowman comes some other time, we are basically doomed. And we also need to have some set of randomness so that we actually see, the background changing rather than the same thing happening over and over again. And this is a pretty ingenious way to do it. And here's how you do it. So you can just say switch costume to, and after this you can grab a plus and put this within a mod, and or rather put a mod within this plus, and you can take another plus and put it within the first bracket of the mod, just like this. And you need to make sure that all of this is nested correctly, and I'll explain what this does, but just throw this in here. Here you can type in a mod 4 and you can type in a +1 here. So within these two addition brackets which you have opened up, you can head over to looks first, and you can grab this block which says costume number and drag and drop it this way. Now like I mentioned, we need to have some kind of randomness going on. So now you can head over to operators and grab this block which says pick random of 1 to 10 or something like that, and you can change it to be 0 to 2. And I know this thing is probably getting a little bit too big, so I will make sure that all of this is moved to the side. But what this basically does is, if you just forget about what we're doing here first, where we have costume number plus something, whenever we're using a mod 4, what is going to happen is the result is always going to be less than 4. For example, the maximum possible result that can come out of this is 3, and a 3 would result in a road. Now if this particular thing turns out to be 4, then 4 mod 4 is going to be set back to 1. So this result here is just never going to result in being more than 4 because it's impossible to do it with a modulus this way. So if we add in a +1 after this, you could have anything. You could even have the fourth costume, which is the tree, which is going to be equal to something like this. So let's just say our costume number is 1, then we add 2 to it, and this results in 3, and then we add 1, which becomes 4. But the benefit of doing it this way is not only we have, randomness, which is from the pick random, but we're never going to result by picking the snowman, which is the 5th element. So if you have it this way, it would result in no errors, but you need to be really careful with the math that's going on here. Alright, so now it's time to get this sprite moving around. So we need some coordinates here. So I'll first set the x coordinate to be, I believe, 458, and the y coordinate is going to be 322. These numbers just turn out to work perfectly with our art set up this way. So it's just a number which works out. You can try and mess around with them a bit, but you'd start to see that this number works pretty well. So after you have this in place, now it's important to realize that at our current code, we'd never have a snowman. And while that is intended, we also need to make sure that the snowman appears when we want it to. And as it turns out, we need the snowman to appear right before we have our road appearing. And the simple way to do it is the way I'm doing it right now. So we have an if then checker first, and we check if, first of all, the costume number is equal to 3. So if costume number is 3, and you can just duplicate this block from here, and if this is the case, then we know that the costume is the road. And if the costume is the road, then it gives some chance of the snowman coming in. We don't want the snowman to be there every time, but we could have a simple 50% chance of, if the coin flips this way, then we have the snowman coming in. But if the coin flips the other way, then we do not have the snowman coming in. We could simply have this by saying if pick random from 0 to 1 equates to 1, then we have a new snowman coming in. So what I'll do here is, I'll first switch costume to snowman, then I will create a new clone, and after I've created a new clone, I will switch my costume back to the road costume, which is what I was initially. Alright, so if you remember, I said that the x and y positions are going to be different for the road, and that is true. We need to make sure that the x and y positions are very different for the road. Otherwise, we'll just end up with a very disgusting site where our road is actually going to come into this main highway or whatever you want to call this, and it would just be a complete flop. So to make sure that that doesn't happen, we will have a set x and y here once again. So set x to something and set y to something. I'll come to that in a minute, but just have this in place. So basically the logic is, and yep, I made that exact mistake, you want to put it outside this if then. So if the costume is 3, then we go to, like this. So never mind, I was correct the first time. If the costume is 3, you want to put it outside this if then, that's what I meant. So if the costume is 3, then we need to go to a different x and y, but if it's not, then we do not need to go to a different x and y. But if the costume is 3, then we first have a simple, random coin flip, if that's what, that's the analogy I'll use. And we see if we need to insert a snowman in there or not. Either way, whether we insert a snowman or not, we're going to switch the x and y position to this current position. And remember that the costume number is 3 here, and even if we do not go through this if then, our costume would still be the road. And as you can see here, I had a switch background to road rather than a switch costume to road small, which is what you really need to have. And if you have this in place, this should work out pretty neatly for you. So we can set the x coordinate finally to be 394, and we can set the y coordinate to be 354. And this is what is the coordinate we need for the road. And once again, we need to make sure that a clone is created. Otherwise, all this is going to be for nothing. So create clone of myself. And once again, you need to be careful which if then block you place it out of. And you need to place it within spawn countdown is 0. but outside if costume number is 3, because we need to create a clone regardless of what the costume number is. And after this, if we just leave it like this, the spawn countdown is just going to stay as 0 and we'll keep on creating clones for no reason. And the whole point of having, a change spawn countdown by 1, by -1, is to make sure that the spawn countdown is constantly changing, and as a result our clones are slowed down. So to make sure that happens, what we can do is set spawn countdown to a number like 22 here. And 22 works good, and if you have a better number you could go ahead with that, but as it turns out I think this number is pretty decent to go along with. Now before we get into the clone updates, it's important to make sure that here you have an if then condition that makes sure that the spawn countdown is reset to 0, not 0, is reset to 1 in case it goes below 0. So to simply do that, just have an if then saying if 0 is greater than the spawn countdown, then all we have to do here is just set the spawn countdown to not 0 but 1. If we set it to 0, then here it's going to go to -1. We're not going to enter into this if then condition and we'd be stuck in a perpetual loop. But you just need to have a set spawn countdown to 1, and this will ensure that everything works perfectly. Okay, so now we can get into the clone updates, and this is going to take quite a bit of space, so make sure it's on your right. And I'll zoom out so that you guys can see better, and I'm pretty sure that the text is quite clear. So first of all, we need to make sure that we go to that particular X and Y position that our clone is going to. So you can just say go to X and go to Y, and after this we can add in a show just to make sure that the clone is shown and not hidden. And we also need to make sure that the clone is constantly moving. So we can change X and Y by a certain number, and we can change X by -8 and we can change Y by -4. The numbers just turn out to work fine, and I'm going to go ahead with those. So now there's also going to be a point when the clone is going to come to the extreme left end of the screen. And when that happens, we need to make sure that we delete that particular clone. So we can add in an if then. So we can say if the clone X value is less than -450. And 450 is going to be what is going to be the extreme left end of the screen. And we don't even have to consider the Y, because if the X is that much, it automatically implies that Y is going to be pretty much to the extreme left end as well. So if this is the case, then we can delete our clone. And also after this, I'm going to have another if then, and this if then is going to check whether the costume number is 3, which is whether it is a road or not. So we can just say if costume number is equal to 3, just like this. And if this is the case, then I will make sure that I go right at the back. So what I'll do is I'll first say go to front layer, and after this I will go backward 120 layers, okay, just so that we're right at the back. And I will also make sure that each of our clones are going back every single time. So you can add a go backward 30 layers probably after you change your X and Y. Okay, so now we can run this, and you're probably going to start to see some errors. So you can see that we have all of this coming perfectly, but you can see that on the edge of our screen, this is extremely annoying. I mean, we don't want our obstacles to come around like this. I mean, the background to come around like this, and it clearly makes the game very distracting, and also it's quite a glitch. And I'm not entirely sure why this works, but it's a scratch bug. And we can fix this by just changing the size a couple of times. So before we go to that position, we can set the size to be 400. And after we go there, we can set the size back to 100. So you need to make sure we have that before we show, otherwise you'll start to see some errors. But just having this in place will make sure that all of our things go back very, very smoothly. And as you can see, the illusion is already very convincing that we are running along on this highway, and it's the cars which are going to come, which are actually moving. I mean, it's the player who's actually moving, and the cars are coming as well. And it's not the player just standing stationary. So I'm going to end this video here. In the next video, we'll get into the obstacles and how we can make the cars come forward, and that will take the game to a whole new level. If you've enjoyed this video, please make sure you leave a like, and also don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.